I have been making this issue of what, for lack of a better word, big food. I think this is the sleeper campaign issue. I think it's something that resonates with women. I think it resonates with men too, obviously, because I'm talking about it. But I think for a lot of people, it's not a partisan thing. It's a good government thing. It's like, hey, we're going to protect you. And I think the more that people find out about it, they're appalled that the government's not doing enough. Do you think that am I overstating this, or do you really, because I think that this could be a huge winning issue for whichever campaign latches on and tries to take it?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think people are starting to get fed up with it. I think especially moms of young children who are seeing this epidemic of childhood illness that we have never seen in the history of this country before, and seeing that so much of the, disease that's coming out here that children are being faced with right now is literally due to so much of the food that we're consuming on a daily basis, and the chemicals that are put in our cereals and the pesticides sprayed all over our food supply. It's and I think moms are sick of it. And it's just so exciting for me. I have been preaching this for the last 11 years since we started our company. I've been preaching this, and now it's finally getting some major traction out there because of people like RFK, because of people like Casey and Callie Means that are all over, spreading the message. It's just, it's so exciting to me to see this change starting to happen.
You said you've been championing this for a while. What was the reaction when you first started bringing it up versus now?
Yeah, a lot of skepticism. I think people have always thought the government's protecting me. They're protecting me. And I think, that is the way the government used to be. But we just see there's just so many special interests in there and influencing our tax dollars and influencing our government agencies that are regulating our food supply, regulating our, drug supply. And it's kind of scary. And we're seeing the repercussions of this. We're seeing, epidemic levels of, like I said, childhood chronic illness. 75% of American adults are obese or overweight. 50%, up to close to 50% of children are obese and overweight. This was unheard of 50 years ago.
Yeah. I want to show you, there's a video, you mentioned RFK. He put this video out that showed, and they testified in front of Congress, but then he put this video out about cereals, which I found fascinating, because he showed the difference between a cereal, same cereal that you can buy here in the US versus what it looks like in Europe. Let's take a look.
This is what most Americans innocently put into their bodies these days, and most alarmingly, into the bodies of their children. And it's no coincidence that Americans die earlier than Canadians or Germans or Italians or Japanese or Koreans or Australians or most any other comparable country. And it wasn't always that way. Until the early 1990s, our life expectancy was the same or better than other developed countries. Then suddenly, more and more Americans began suffering from chronic diseases, from obesity, cancer, diabetes, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, heart disease, and all kinds of autoimmune diseases. Our maternal mortality rate soared to the highest of any developed country on Earth. Same with infant mortality. Like the frog in the slowly boiling water, we didn't really notice as we got sicker and sicker. We've grown now to accept chronic disease conditions as normal. But now, in 2024, we're finally waking up to this cataclysm, and we're asking ourselves, how in the world did this happen? A big part of it is our diet. Restaurants that serve contaminated food are fined or shut down. But when it's the government that approves the poisons in our food, a few people get very, very rich, and the toxins end up in every supermarket aisle. Let me show you what I mean. Doritos, Cheez-Its, Cap'n Crunch, gummy bears. Everyone knows that these are junk foods, so maybe you wouldn't be too surprised to see that the ingredients include a lot of poisons, including a harmful yellow dye called tetrazine, or yellow dye number 5. What you may not know is that this dye was originally made out of the sludge that's left over when you turn coal into coke for blast furnaces. It's called coal tar, and I've actually sued many big industries for legacy contamination of coal tar all around the country because it's so toxic and it's so harmful to the environment and human beings. A century ago, it was just an obnoxious industrial byproduct that everybody was trying to figure out ways to get rid of. One of the ways that they did that was by paving roads. But then a British chemist figured out that the coal tar could be used to derive fabric dye. And if fabric dye, why not food? Food manufacturers began using it to cover up the discoloration of low-quality foods that they wanted to pass off on unsuspecting customers. They didn't know back then that this yellow dye, tartrazine, causes tumors, asthma, developmental delays, neurological damage, ADD, ADHD, hormone disruption, gene damage, anxiety, depression, intestinal injuries. Well, we know it now.
But so when you look at something like that, you said to yourself, how does the government allow that? We get told all the time by the FDA and the CDC, I mean, do this, don't do that, don't smoke, right? Be careful how much alcohol you put in your body. And yet we're putting a chemical in our body that is a byproduct of tar. I mean, to me, when I saw that, I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's unconscionable, really, that this has been allowed to happen. We have this outrage, over COVID. We have this outrage over different things that, our country's experiencing, but you don't see them outraged over the chemicals that are in our food that are causing so much illness and disease. I mean, we know that so many of these chemicals are literally causing our gut lining to be destroyed. And that is causing so much. It's really at the root cause of so many of these diseases that are out there that RFK mentioned. I mean, it's unbelievable. We see it every day.
Well, and you talked about this the first time that we ever talked about how much of this is connected, right? So it's not just, oh, I have an unhealthy gut, so I'm bloating or an indigestion. Like that affects your mood, your sleep, so much of this is interconnected that it's not just one thing. It really does affect your health, number one. Number two, when you think about the statistics, all of these other health things that are happening, the consequences, cancers, other ailments that all are a byproduct in the last several years. The only connection is, wow, processed food.
Right. And, the scary part is we all know what processed foods are, or most people know what processed foods are. You see most of the food items that are found in the middle of the refrigerator, the middle of the grocery store. And, you could look at the ingredients and see all the ingredients that you can't pronounce. And those are generally considered processed foods. You'll see them. But what's so scary is with fruit, for example, the fruit is being sprayed with pesticides. They're being sprayed with other chemicals, and they're not listed on the label like they are, at least in the middle of part of this grocery store. You'll see what pesticides are in there or what, chemicals are in there. But with fruit, you don't have that listing of all of the chemicals that are being sprayed on there to keep them looking beautiful.
Well, no, and that's the important part, right? I want to eat healthy. I'm like, oh, I'll eat more fruit. And then you find out through these videos. I always joke, I think I told you this before, my wife thinks it's hysterical that I find out half of my health/medical information now from Instagram. Mm-hmm. But you're right. But I can't go to this. They don't write on the supermarket, hey, this orange was sprayed with this pesticide. But someone on Instagram showing it to me, and I'm like, okay. And now I know. But it's I thought, wow, I'm eating healthy. I'm eating an orange. I'm eating an apple. But you find out that, hey, guess what you're doing, right? I did this test the other day where I took these strawberries and put them in water, and I think it was baking soda, and let them sit because I'd seen it on Instagram. And all of a sudden I showed the water afterwards, and it's disgusting what comes out because the baking soda. But that's what I don't get is that why are we not being told? I keep thinking, and this is where, again, I hate to link it back to politics, but we're about 20 days out from an election. I would want to know, hey, this strawberry has stuff in it. Be careful when you put it in your body.
Yeah. Well, big food and big pharma are influencing our government policy. That's what it comes down to. I mean, they are strongly influential and, money talks. And that's even medical schools, we know that big pharma is funding so much of medical schools, and doctors are being influenced by this. And, there aren't classes on nutrition, or not a lot of classes. There's maybe one class on nutrition in medical schools. And so we're not talking about the food. We're not talking about the quality of the food. We're not talking about, how food could actually be healing to us. People have thought it's just woo-woo or it doesn't make sense, but really food is medicine. And we've seen this over, centuries and centuries of our, evolution.
I want to get to the doctor piece in a second, but you mentioned the pesticides, right? So what do you know about the effect of these pesticides on our health?
Well, I know that the pesticides are actually wreaking havoc on our gut health. They are really, in my opinion, the cause of all of these chronic conditions that you had mentioned. You know, RFK would speak at a lot of autism conferences that we spoke at, and we talking about this all the time. We see this uprise in autism with children. I mean, there's a massive increase in autism with children right now because we know that it's affecting the gut lining. We know that when your gut is disrupted, we are causing so much of our disease. 70% of our immune system is found in our gut. So our ability to fight off these pathogens are found in our gut. So, you know, we're going to be faced with pathogens. That's what happens. But when we're disrupting our gut, it's really it's like the feeding ground for all of these other diseases. I mean, mental health issues, you know, we have mental health issues. 90% of our serotonin, which is our happy hormones, produced in our gut. We have to be focusing on our gut when we're talking about overall health.
Do you find that there's, you mentioned the evolution of this issue over the last, say, 10, 15 years. When you say there's a much more receptive audience now, is it just moms that you're talking to, or is it elected officials as well?
I think it's a lot of the moms I'm talking to. I mean, obviously, I'm in the health and wellness space. I do feel like Casey and Callie Means have made a huge, splash in this and really bringing awareness. Really well spoken, great, very educated on the topic, and they've collaborated with a lot of great health and wellness influencers out there that are, taking their years and years of research and digging and spreading this message out to the masses. And it's just, and it makes sense to people. That's what I think it's all making sense. Like, why are we all so sick? Why, when you and I were in school, Sean, like, we didn't know anybody who had a peanut allergy or any sort of allergy.
No one. I didn't know a single person. And then suddenly my kids go to school and they're like, nothing can be like nothing. And people are having not just an allergy, a violent reaction.
Yes, violent, and we didn't see that years ago, and now it's like, what is going on? And it's really, it comes down to our gut and all of these things that we're doing. Our gut is so critical to like having a healthy life, being healthy, and yet we're living in this world with pesticides that are so disruptive to our gut, to antibiotics, to chemicals, to the food dyes. All of these chemicals and pesticides and herbicides are so disruptive to our gut, and that's why I believe we are seeing this uprise in chronic conditions. I mean, cancer is at its highest level in young adults. It's so sad.
You mentioned the Means, Casey and Callie. You turned me on to listening to them, and I was listening. She was a doctor, like a Stanford trained doctor, and she's basically like, to your point, this is how little we learn about nutrition in medical school. They learn to hyper specialize, like in she mentioned this one doctor who gets the head of Stanford, I think is a ortho, what do they call it? Osotherapy. I was like, there's someone who just specializes in the ear, and like surgical procedures. And yet she's like, we don't learn about the whole body. And this goes back to your point about the gut. So much of our issues are connected, but we're seeing higher infertility, lower life expectancy, and higher cancer rates. And we're all sitting around scratching our head like, gosh, what could that be? Mm-hmm. And it seems to me is that the one thing that has changed is our diet and what we're putting into our bodies in the last couple decades.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the food is just so compromised. It's not fresh. Like you go to Europe and people don't experience a lot of these issues.
Well, that's almost like the control group, right? If you think about an experiment, you're like, here's what we do in America. Here's everyone else. They're not getting sick. They're not facing these issues, and we are.
Yeah, or Japan is another great example of just, they're not allowing, we as our society, we have to be protecting our children. That is our job, our duty to be protecting our children. And we are not. I mean, we're, marketing all of these horrible foods to our kids. And I think people are outraged. I have a daughter who just had a baby, and she is so vigilant. These young moms are so vigilant now about trying to keep things clean. And I mean, not all moms can do it. But I think you're seeing this huge trend in this more natural, everyone wants to go back to the way we evolved, in nature. And I think that's going to bring health back to this nation.
As a kid, you can tell for those watching the video portion of this, like I'm fair skin, right? I was a kid, I was growing up, I was always putting zinc on my face, right? Because I was out in the sun a lot. And then sunscreen evolved. And based on a video I saw the other day, I asked my dermatologist, I said, hey, she's always telling me you got to put sunscreen on all the time. You got to have, because you're fair skin and we like to zap stuff off your face. And so I said, hey, by the way, I keep seeing these videos about how bad some sunscreens are. I'd look on the side of the product and, there's these names I don't know. And she goes, oh, yeah, that's true. I go, what do you mean? Wait.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that the stuff I'm using to protect my skin is dangerous for other reasons? And she said, well, don't put stuff that has all these things on it, right? And she starts reading off the ingredients. And I'm like, yeah, those are the ones they sell you in the drugstore, though. So it's everything. I turn around and go, wait, I thought I was being healthy and smart and safe. And it turns out that I'm doing harm to myself in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's unbelievable. And that's what's so funny is like zinc is actually fine to do,
right,
to put on. And now you used to use zinc, and now you're starting using all of these other chemicals. And it's just, our skin is our largest organ of our body. And yet we're slathering, little babies, we're putting all these chemicals on our babies. And we don't want to have, you definitely don't want to sunburn your skin, and that's not good. But sun is good for us. Sun is so good for us. It's our source of vitamin D. It's critical for us.
So the funny thing is, the other thing that I thought was interesting, right? I mentioned, the evolution of this issue. You talked about it, right? The other day I'm looking on Instagram and a post comes up from CNN. I'll put it on the screen showing all of the kitchen utensils, the spatula, et cetera, that the thing I use all those things all the time. I love to cook, omelets or whatever on the stove. And I realized that it says, oh, guess what? These things have forever chemicals in them. They're probably harming you. And I'm thinking to myself, again, between the nonstick stuff, the forever chemicals, we're allowing ourselves to do this because this is permitted in the marketplace.
Yeah, I know. It's unbelievable. I remember I was spending like hours and hours and hours, like trying to research which cookware would be safe to cook with for my family. And it's like, you still don't have great answers out there. There's just so many chemicals that are just all over the place. And it's very, it's discouraging in a lot of ways because, what are we going to do if we can't find clean food out there and clean cookware?
So what do you do? If someone's hearing this and they're like, God, now I'm discouraged, Sean, I keep hearing what Tina's saying and I'm bummed out. What are the steps that I or anyone could be taking right now to say, how do I make my health a little bit better?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I like to focus on is resilience. We are going to be faced with chemicals. In our lifetime, we're going to be faced with it. I'm hoping that the, mission that Callie and Casey and RFK have started is going to really change. I do believe that it's going to change our world and going to make our world a healthier place. But right now, it's going to take a while. So right now, what can we do? We want to build resilient bodies because we are going to be faced with these disruptors and pathogens and all these chemicals. So we want to be resilient. And one of the ways we start with that is focusing on our gut, because our gut is, we are 10 times more bacterial cells than we are human. And I think that's really hard for people to wrap their head around. We are actually 10 times more bacterial than we are human cells. And yet we're living in this world that's so antibacterial, from antibacterial hand soaps, antibacterial hand sanitizers, antibiotics in our food supply, chemicals and pesticides are wreaking havoc on our gut. So I would say to focus on your gut health and really try to make yourself as resilient when you're faced with these chemicals. Of course, we need to stay away from processed foods as much as possible, just eating whole, real foods, and, cleaning your vegetables, trying to eat organic. And I know that's hard. And I know that people, it's expensive to do that, but, you could go to Costco or you could go to Trader Joe's and find like frozen organic vegetables. And that is a little bit more cost-effective way to eat organic, but really trying to eat whole, clean, real foods, and then focusing on your gut health, because we know that our gut is where so much of our immune system is. Our neurotransmitters are produced there. It's really the foundation for your health.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.